He never planned to stay. That was the rule. 5 minutes, no more. Just long enough to satisfy his mother, long enough to say he tried. Yet, in a place filled with laughter and carnival lights, a stranger's voice would soon dismantle a lifetime of careful detachment. At the edge of the autumn festival, Adrian Cole stood with his hands buried deep in the pockets of a charcoal coat. The sharp scent of kettle corn drifted through the crisp October air, mingling with cider, roasted nuts, and fallen leaves. Around him, families moved through the glow of lanterns and laughter, their joy a bright contrast to his quiet impatience. He wasn't here for the games, nor the nostalgia the fair promised. He was here because his mother had asked, no, insisted. 5 minutes, Adrian. You owe me that much. So he waited, eyes cold, posture stiff, surrounded by the hum of life he didn't quite feel part of. The CEO of a private medical firm, Adrian lived by precision and distance. People, emotions, connections. He handled them all like business transactions, efficiently and without risk. Tonight was supposed to be no different. A charity blind date orchestrated by his mother under the guise of goodwill. He'd imagined dinner in an elegant restaurant, muted conversation over wine. Instead, he found himself amid hay bales and pumpkin lanterns. He glanced at his watch again. 1 more minute and he'd leave. Then, through the slow swirl of falling leaves, he saw her. Lila Warren approached from the festival gate, the light catching in her soft golden hair. She wasn't the polished perfection he expected. A pale scarf was knotted loosely at her neck, her boots were worn at the edges, and her smile carried no hint of performance. The sight caught him off guard, so ordinary and unguarded that he forgot for a breath to hide behind his usual composure. "Lila?" he asked when she reached him. Her cheeks were pink from the wind. "Adrian?" she replied, her voice warm. He nodded, shaking her cold hand. "Thanks for meeting me here," she said. "I know it's not exactly traditional." Adrian's gaze flicked to the carousel, to the cotton candy stands, to the shrieking laughter echoing from every corner. "You could say that," he murmured. "No wine list, no maître d'. You've definitely redefined the term date." She laughed, a soft, genuine sound that startled him in its ease. "I asked your mother if we could meet somewhere simple," she explained. "I don't like restaurants on first dates. Everyone performs in those places. The lighting's fake, the smiles are fake. Here, no one has time to pretend." Adrian studied her for a moment. "And this," he said, gesturing around them, "feels honest to you?" "It does," she said simply. "People are too busy having fun to fake it." They walked side by side, conversation halting but unforced. Lila didn't rush to fill silence. She seemed to understand that quiet had its own kind of rhythm. It unnerved him, this ease. He wasn't used to people who didn't chase approval. He was about to end the evening, 5 minutes nearly up, when she stopped and looked beyond him. "Ever been on that?" she asked. Adrian turned. The Ferris wheel loomed tall against the darkening sky, its gold and blue bulbs flickering like tired stars. "Not in a long time," he admitted. "It's different from up there," she said softly. The town looks smaller, quieter. For a moment you can almost believe everything is in the right place. Her eyes reflected the moving lights, steady, soft, alive. She added, barely above the wind, "I used to come here with my sister. We rode that wheel every year." No matter what else changed, that didn't. He didn't know what compelled him to speak next. "Would you want to go again?" he asked. She blinked in surprise. "Now? Unless you've got somewhere else to be," he said, half smiling. And with that, his 5-minute rule dissolved. They didn't rush to the ride. Instead, they lingered. She stopped to try the ring toss, missing every attempt, but laughing like she was winning. Adrian paid the booth attendant silently, almost amused. Later, she bought cotton candy, insisting the blue one tasted better. When she offered him a piece, he grimaced at the sweetness, and she grinned as though she'd just caught him being human. They wandered through the fair until they came across a flickering photo booth. "Souvenir," she said, tugging him inside. The resulting strip captured her mid-laughter and him looking half bewildered. In the last frame, she tugged at his coat, teasing. The photos slipped into his wallet before he could stop himself. The night deepened. Lantern light stretched long across the grass. The crowd thinned, but the laughter carried like a heartbeat in the distance. They passed a game stand filled with rubber ducks bobbing in shallow water. Lila's expression shifted. Something in her eyes dimmed. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded but didn't look at him. "Some days I wonder if I'm meant for this. Nursing, helping, healing. There are nights I go home thinking maybe I'm not enough." Adrian hesitated, then reached for a toy rifle from the counter. "Tonight," he said gently, "you don't have to save anyone. Just hit a duck." Her laugh came out in a soft burst, half amusement, half release. She missed twice, hit once, and raised her chin in mock triumph. He smiled despite himself. For the first time in months, maybe years, he wasn't thinking about time or leaving. When they finally reached the Ferris wheel, twilight had folded into night. The cabins creaked softly as they climbed aboard. Lila's posture was too rigid, her fingers twisted in her lap. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, then flinched when the cabin swayed. Her hand shot out instinctively, clutching his. "I hate this," she whispered. "The height, the feeling," she breathed. Suspended. No control. Like if something goes wrong, there's nothing you can do. He stayed silent. The wheel rose higher, carrying them above the town's golden sprawl. "It's the same feeling I had when we lost him," she said finally. "The boy I couldn't save." I was right there, his mother holding his hand, and I just froze. I told myself I was strong, but that night I wasn't. Adrian didn't speak. He simply let her hold on. Then, without warning, the lights below flickered and went dark. The Ferris wheel stopped mid-air. The silence that followed was almost holy, the kind that makes hearts reveal their truest sounds. "Power outage," Adrian said, voice steady, but her breathing quickened. Panic rippled through her body. Gently, he slipped off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "We're fine," he murmured. "It's just a little darkness." Minutes passed. The fair below shimmered in faint emergency glow. Then Lila whispered, "I used to think if I cared enough, I could keep people from dying. But sometimes you do everything right, and it still ends the same." He turned toward her, the dim light outlining her face. "I know that sound," he said quietly. "I used to be a surgeon." She looked at him, eyes wide. "There was a failure during a procedure," he continued. "My mentor was on the table. I did everything I could. He died anyway. The next morning, I walked away from it all." Lila's voice trembled. "You blamed yourself." He nodded once. "Maybe saving someone," she said softly, "isn't about fixing them. Maybe it's about not letting them face the dark alone." Their hands stayed joined as the lights blinked back on and the Ferris wheel creaked to life. The world below reignited in color, music, laughter, movement, but neither spoke. Her head found his shoulder. Between them, something unspoken settled. Not rescue, not romance, just recognition. And when the ride ended, neither wanted to move. When their cabin finally touched the ground, the night had become a living mural of light and motion once more. Music drifted through the air, gentle, familiar, almost nostalgic. Yet, for Adrian Cole and Lila Warren, the world seemed to have slowed, as if something fragile had just unfolded between them, and the universe knew better than to interrupt. They stepped off the Ferris wheel in silence. Around them, laughter echoed, the scent of caramel and cider curling through the air, the carousel's soft glow painting the edges of their faces. For a long moment, neither spoke. It wasn't awkwardness, it was reverence. Adrian gestured toward a wooden bench just beyond the fair's edge. "Sit," Lila nodded, brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek as they walked toward it. From where they sat, the festival stretched before them, a wash of gold and orange, of movement and memory. He checked his watch without meaning to, and Lila noticed. "Is it later than you expected?" she asked gently. He gave a small, rueful smile. "Let's just say I broke my own rule tonight." "Rule?" "5 minutes," he said. "That's all I give myself for blind dates." Her brow lifted in quiet amusement. "Guess I should apologize then." "You shouldn't," he replied. The words came easier than he expected. Lila looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. "I know I'm not what people expect to find in your world." "My world? You know what I mean," she said softly. "Glass offices, polished shoes, the kind of people who speak in boardroom tones and never forget to smile for the cameras. I'm not that. I'm just me. A nurse who works double shifts and sometimes eats cereal for dinner." Adrian leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "You talk like that's something to apologize for." "It's not," she said quickly. "It's just reality." He was quiet for a while. Then, with unexpected honesty, he said, "You didn't just keep me here longer than 5 minutes, Lila. You made me stop counting." She smiled, small and unguarded, and the space between them softened. They sat that way, shoulders nearly touching, their silence a kind of understanding that no words could improve upon. Eventually, she turned her gaze toward the Ferris wheel, now spinning again, its lights cutting circles into the night sky. "It's strange," she murmured. "Being up there makes everything look smaller." "Not in a bad way, just clearer." Adrian followed her gaze. "Perspective tends to do that," he said quietly. She turned to him. "Thank you. For what?" "For staying." He didn't answer immediately, just nodded. Then she stood, brushing her hands on her coat. "I should go," she said softly. "Early shift tomorrow. I'll walk you out." They strolled in silence beneath the string lights that swayed above them like captured stars. The sound of laughter faded as they neared the edge of the fairground, replaced by the faint hum of distant traffic. "This was unexpected," she said at last. "In a good way," he replied. She extended her hand. "Good night, Adrian." He took it gently. "Good night, Lila." She began to walk away, her steps slow, steady. He watched her reach the corner before she turned slightly. Their eyes met across the glow of the streetlight, and she gave him a faint, almost wistful smile before disappearing into the night. Adrian turned to leave, but paused. The bench where they'd sat still held something pale and delicate, her scarf. He picked it up, brushing his thumb across the soft fabric. It carried a faint trace of her scent, vanilla and lavender touched by the wind. For the first time in years, something small tugged at his chest. Not longing exactly, but the echo of possibility. He folded the scarf carefully, tucked it under his arm, and walked away. The next morning, the scarf sat on the counter beside his untouched mug of coffee. Adrian stared at it for a long time, the quiet hum of his apartment wrapping around him. Before he could talk himself out of it, he reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. His mother's voice came through on the second ring, knowing before he said a word. "You want her number, don't you?" He paused. "Yes. I told you 5 minutes wouldn't be enough." "It's not," he admitted. "This isn't. Returning a scarf is a perfectly respectable excuse," she said, her tone laced with victory. "But don't wait too long, dear." He found Lila at a small bookstore tucked between a bakery and a barber shop, a quiet side street, the kind of place people stumbled upon rather than planned. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, paging through a weathered pediatrics textbook, tabs sticking out like flags. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered. She looked up, blinking in surprise. "Adrian?" He held up the scarf. "You left this behind?" Her smile warmed the air between them. "I was wondering where I dropped that." He handed it over. Their fingers brushed briefly and neither pulled away too quickly. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said. "I didn't plan to come," he replied. "But then I did." A small silence followed, comfortable, suspended. Then she gestured to a stack of books beside her. "Help me carry some of these?" I'm looking for old editions. My patients like when the pictures look hand-drawn. Less perfect, more real. He smiled faintly and picked up a few. Hand-drawn sounds about right. They moved through the narrow aisles, laughter breaking quietly between shelves. It wasn't a date, not really, but it felt like something waiting to be named. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, laying soft gold across her hair. She told him about her work, her long shifts, the joy and ache of healing children. Real healing, she said, isn't always about curing. It's about holding a hand long enough that someone remembers they're not alone. Adrian listened. Really listened, in a way he hadn't done for anyone in a long time. At one point, she tilted her head and asked, "Why run a hospital if you don't believe in saving people anymore?" He leaned back, thinking. "Maybe because you were right," he said slowly. Healing isn't just about procedures or machines. It's about creating a space where people are allowed to try. She smiled, eyes warm. That counts. A week later, change came quietly. Lila was called into a staff meeting at the hospital. The room buzzed with curiosity, the administrators uncharacteristically smiling. "We've received a renovation grant," one announced. The pediatric unit, new equipment, comfort furniture for families, art therapy supplies. Anonymous donor. No naming rights, just a note of gratitude. For the nurses who never get enough credit. The words settled in the room like a prayer. Lila felt her breath hitch, her thoughts drifting to a quiet man in a bookstore, fingers tracing old pages of a medical text he no longer practiced from. Later that day, she passed the pediatric hallway and saw a temporary sign taped beside the construction tape. "Coming soon, a space for healing." She smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the paper's edge. "You're still saving people, Adrian," she whispered. Just differently, and maybe she thought she was too. The gala shimmered with glass and gold, a room designed to impress. Chandeliers hung like constellations, tables gleamed beneath crystal and silver, and the air hummed with polite laughter that sounded just a little too rehearsed. Adrian had attended hundreds of nights like this, fundraisers, award dinners, benefit galas, rooms where people smiled through speeches and measured success in the size of donations. But this one was different. This time, Lila was coming. He had invited her carefully, deliberately, not because he wanted to show her off, but because he wanted her there, beside him. For once, he wanted to bring someone real into a world that too often felt made of glass. When she arrived, she paused at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting lightly on the railing. She wore a navy dress, elegant, simple, perfectly her. No glitter, no excess. Her hair was swept low at the nape of her neck, and the only jewelry she wore was a thin silver bracelet. For a second she just stood there, scanning the glittering room below, and he could see the hesitation in her eyes. Adrian crossed the floor quickly, weaving through conversations and champagne flutes until he reached her. He didn't give the crowd a chance to stare. He simply reached out, took her hand and said softly, "You look beautiful, and tonight you're the person I most want standing beside me. No titles, no expectations." Her lips curved into a small, grateful smile. "That's a dangerous thing to promise," she murmured. "Then I'll risk it." They stepped into the ballroom together, and for a while, everything felt right. They mingled, laughed, clinked glasses. Adrian introduced her simply as Lila. No qualifiers, no explanations. Just her name, but in rooms like these, simplicity never lasted long. A woman in a sleek red gown, Dr. Vera Lang, a renowned cardiac surgeon, tilted her head with polite curiosity. "Lila, are you one of the research fellows? Or perhaps in public relations?" "I was in pediatrics," Lila answered evenly. "Now I help cover emergency nursing shifts." Dr. Lang's smile thinned. "Ah," she said, as if she'd just learned something small but significant. "How noble!" It wasn't the words it was the tone. The faintest edge of condescension, polished smooth by years of habit. Lila met it with grace, but the air around her shifted. The warmth cooled. The easy laughter dimmed just a notch. Later, as Adrian was giving a brief statement to the press near the silent auction table, Lila passed two men murmuring over champagne. If Cole's really serious about someone, one whispered to the other, I'd expect a department head or a Harvard genius. Not a floor nurse. The words weren't meant for her, but they landed all the same. She froze for half a heartbeat, her glass trembling slightly in her hand. By the time Adrian returned, her smile had settled back into place, but her eyes were quieter. Everything okay? He asked, his voice low. I think I'll head out a bit early, she said softly. Thank you for tonight, he frowned, sensing what he couldn't quite name. Did something happen? Lila hesitated. For a second she looked like she might brush it off, but then she met his gaze, her voice steady, almost too calm. You're a good man, Adrian, she said, but I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep proving I deserve to be in rooms like this. Not when every look, every word feels like I'm being measured against a scale I never agreed to, he blinked. Lila, I'm tired, she said simply. Tired of feeling like I have to earn the right to be seen. And before he could respond, she turned and walked toward the exit. Her scarf, that same pale, soft one, slipped from her shoulder, trailing behind her like a whisper. She didn't look back. That night, he called. No answer. He texted once, then again. Nothing. The next morning, he drove to the hospital. When he asked for her, a nurse at the front desk, older, sharp-eyed, looked him over and said coolly, She's busy. Maybe it's best if you let her be. He nodded once, quietly, and left. In his office, he sat for a long time with the world muted around him. The city skyline glared through the glass, like a reflection of the life he'd built. Vast, gleaming, and suddenly unbearable. He opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, a crayon drawing from the pediatric ward, a stick-figure nurse with bright yellow hair and glowing hands. She has magic hands, the child had written in crooked letters. She makes people feel better. He stared at it until the lines blurred. How, he wondered, could someone who healed everyone else not believe she was worthy of being loved? And why, for the first time in years, did he feel utterly powerless to fix it? 3 weeks passed, no calls, no messages. Adrian had replayed that night more times than he could count. The sound of her laughter fading beneath the chandeliers, the look in her eyes when she said she was tired of earning space in a world that didn't make room for her. He had built that world, brick by brick, with status and logic and control. And now, for the first time, he wanted to dismantle it. One rainy Tuesday, he found himself walking past a small cafe near the hospital, the one with books piled in the corners and tea that smelled faintly of citrus. Lila used to stop there after her shifts. He stepped inside, the bell chiming softly. She wasn't there. But on the wall above the counter hung a wooden plaque that caught his eye. To the nurses of the ER, the quiet heroes we forget to thank. He stood, staring at it, for a long time. Then he turned around, walked back into the rain, and made a decision he hadn't made in years. The next morning, the emergency department at St. Vincent's was chaos, flu season in full swing. A city bus accident, staff stretched thin. Nurses and doctors moved like clockwork, running on caffeine and instinct. Leela was at the nurses' station, her buns slipping loose, her scrubs wrinkled, her hands smelling faintly of antiseptic. She was writing notes on a chart when a voice behind her said, "I brought coffee and pastries, and if it's all right, I can help with bandaging today." She turned and froze. Adrian stood there, sleeves rolled up, holding 2 trays of coffee and a paper bag. no tie, no coat. Just a man who looked like he'd finally stopped hiding behind titles. "Adrian," she breathed. "What are you doing here?" He smiled faintly, voice steady but soft. "I can't change the world I live in overnight," he said. "But I can walk into yours, and if you'll let me, I'd like to stay in it longer than 5 minutes this time." The room went still for a beat. Dr. Wallace, the older physician passing by, gave him a knowing clap on the shoulder. "Welcome back to the ER, Cole," a younger nurse whispered. "Is that the CEO? Wait, he knows how to wrap a wrist." Lila laughed, small and startled, but real. And when she looked at him again, she didn't look away. They spent the day together, no declarations, no pretense. He handed gauze, wrapped ankles, fetched water. He didn't try to impress anyone. He just helped. Later, when the shift ended, they sat outside on a bench near the staff entrance. The sun was low, the air gold and still. "You've got a paper cut," she said, noticing a thin red line on his hand. He opened the first aid kit between them, then paused. "May I?" She nodded. He took her hand gently, cleaned a small scratch on her palm she hadn't noticed, then placed a bandage over it with quiet care. No grand gesture, no apology speech, just tenderness where it mattered most. Lila looked down at their hands, then up at him. Adrian said nothing. He didn't need to. She already understood. Autumn returned with its familiar breath of crisp air and golden leaves swirling down city streets. The fairground came alive again. Twinkling lights strung between wooden stalls, the faint hum of laughter and music floating through the dusk. It was the same festival where everything had begun, yet the world felt quietly changed. A month had passed since Adrian had shown up at the emergency department, no longer as the man in charge of a hospital empire, but simply as a man trying to belong in someone else's world. Each day he had kept that quiet promise, working beside Lila, bringing coffee before dawn, rolling bandages, laughing softly during rare breaks between chaos. The walls between them had softened, rebuilt from gentler things. Shared glances, brief touches, the unspoken comfort of being understood. That evening, as the last of the day's light stretched thin across the rooftops, Lila's phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She had just finished her shift and stepped out into the cool air when she read his message. "I want to see the town from above again, but not just for 5 minutes." She smiled, the kind of smile that began slow, from somewhere deep, and reached her eyes only after a heartbeat. The same Ferris wheel still stood at the center of the fair, its cabins rising into the violet sky, strings of golden bulbs winking like stars. When she arrived, Adrian was already there, waiting near the gate. Gone was the tailored suit. Tonight, he wore a soft grey sweater, sleeves pushed to his elbows, a small wool blanket folded over his arm. He looked up as she approached, his expression quiet but steady. "Hey," she said lightly. "Hey," he echoed. Right on time. They fell into step together, their hands brushing once, not by accident, not quite on purpose either. As they climbed into the cabin, the wheel creaked softly, lifting them slowly above the fairgrounds. The scent of cinnamon and roasted nuts rose from below, mingling with the faint salt of the evening breeze. Lila glanced down through the glass floor, watching the lights grow smaller. "Let's hope we don't lose power this time," she teased. Adrian chuckled. "And if we do, I came prepared." He lifted the wool blanket. Her laughter spilled out, genuine and unguarded. It felt like the first time all over again, yet safer now, steadier. Like they had both learned how to hold something fragile without fear of it breaking. As the Ferris wheel climbed toward its peak, silence wrapped around them. The quiet that only exists when two people no longer need to fill it. The town stretched out below, rooftops bathed in gold, rivers glinting like silver ribbons. Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, not the kind that made promises of forever, thinner, simpler, unassuming. He opened it to reveal a delicate silver chain with a tiny Ferris wheel charm etched into the pendant. Leela blinked, her breath catching. "The first time I met you," Adrian began, voice low, "I told myself I'd only stay for 5 minutes. That was my rule. No attachments, no risks." He paused, his gaze steady on hers. "But 5 minutes with you changed something. You laughed like you meant it. You listened without judgment. You made me want to stay, not just that night, but in the version of myself I am when I'm with you." The Ferris wheel swayed slightly, the motion slow and rhythmic. Leila didn't speak. Her eyes shimmered in the fading light. He continued, softer now. "This isn't a proposal. Not yet. It's not a promise that I know where life will take us. It's just a reminder that every day I'll choose to stay." He leaned forward, fastening the chain gently around her neck. The cool metal brushed against her skin. The charm settled right over her heart. "If you ever feel unsteady," he said quietly, "or scared, or small, I'll be here. I'll be the hand you can hold." Leila pressed her palm over the charm, her fingers trembling slightly. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "You already are." Neither of them spoke again. The Ferris wheel paused at its highest point, hanging there for a long, beautiful moment. The world seemed to hold its breath. Below them, the fair glowed like a field of stars. The music drifted up faintly, the slow, lilting tune of a carousel somewhere in the distance. Leila leaned against him, the blanket around their shoulders, her fingers sliding between his. It wasn't about rescue anymore. It wasn't about fixing or proving. It was simply about staying. When their cabin began its descent, the noise of the festival returned. Laughter, shouts, the sound of wheels spinning and lights flickering. The spell of silence broke, but the warmth lingered. At the bottom, as they stepped out, Adrian turned toward her. "This time," he said softly, "I'm not leaving." She looked up, eyes bright beneath the Ferris lights. "And this time," she replied, "I'm not letting you." They walked forward together into the glow of the fair, past the music, past the lights, into the steady rhythm of the world still turning. No grand declarations, no speeches, just two people choosing again and again to stay 5 minutes longer. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of roasted sugar and crisp apples. Leila's scarf fluttered behind her as they passed the cider stand, where children ran in circles holding balloons that gleamed like captured moons. Adrian stopped briefly, looking at her profile, the way the fair lights painted soft gold along her cheek, the way her smile curved like something remembered. "You know," he said, 5 minutes used to feel like the safest amount of time in the world. Just long enough to care, but not long enough to get hurt." Leila glanced at him, her eyes kind. "And now?" "Now it doesn't feel like enough," he said quietly. "Not nearly enough," she squeezed his hand. "Good," she whispered, "because I don't plan on going anywhere." They found themselves back near the Ferris wheel again, though neither noticed at first. Above them the cabins kept rising, descending, circling endlessly, a perfect loop of beginnings and returns. For a long while, they stood together in comfortable silence, and somewhere in the distance, the fair's music faded into something slower, softer. A tune like memory, a rhythm like breath. Adrian looked down at her once more, his voice barely audible above the hum of the crowd. "It's strange," he murmured, "how one small rule, just 5 minutes, can change everything." Leila smiled, the pendant glinting against her skin. "Maybe that's all love ever is," she said. "Choosing to stay a little longer than you planned." They walked on, hand in hand until the lights behind them blurred into gold. But life, as it often does, wasn't done with them yet. A few weeks later, change began to ripple through the hospital. New funding, new faces, and a quiet uncertainty about what came next. The calm they had found would soon be tested in ways neither of them expected. For every story that begins with 5 minutes after all, the hardest part is learning what happens after you decide to stay. Winter crept in quietly that year, not with blizzards or heavy snow, but with a stillness that hung in the air, as if the city itself were holding its breath. The hospital lights glowed against the grey mornings, and the Ferris wheel that had once been the centre of everything now stood disassembled for the season, its metal ribs folded like the pages of a story waiting to be reopened. For a while, life settled into something tender and real. Lila worked long shifts in the emergency department, and Adrian, true to his word, kept showing up, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with just a tired smile and rolled-up sleeves. Their worlds had merged in quiet ways. He was no longer the CEO who hid behind policy memos and donor galas. He was just Adrian, the man who had remembered how to listen. Every morning he came early, helping restock supplies, holding clipboards for new residents, staying long enough for her to forget there had ever been a time when he wasn't there. The nurses had stopped whispering when he passed. The jokes turned gentle. Respect, slow and steady, replaced the awe of titles. It was the kind of peace that people don't notice until something shakes it. One Friday evening, as dusk began to fall and the city lights flickered awake, an ambulance screeched into the bay, a multiple vehicle collision on the expressway. The trauma unit flooded with motion. Voices called out numbers, conditions, room assignments. Adrian stood beside Lila, handing her gloves, gauze, anything she needed. 2 incoming criticals, someone shouted. One's a child. Lila froze for half a second, just long enough for a shadow to cross her face. Adrian saw it. The old memory, the one that had haunted her in silence on the Ferris wheel, flickered back to life. He didn't say anything. He just touched her shoulder gently. "You've got this," he said. She nodded once, and then she moved. Swift, focused, every part of her alive in the moment. The next hour was chaos. Commands, alarms, sirens in the distance. The child's pulse faltered, returned, then faded again. Adrian stood just behind her, silent support in a storm of movement. When the final monitor tone steadied, Lila pressed her gloved hands together and exhaled shakily. "He's stable," she whispered. Adrian handed her a towel, his voice barely audible. "You just saved him." She looked at him, eyes wet, not from exhaustion, but relief. "No," she said softly. "We did." Later, when the night grew quieter and the last chart was written, they sat side by side on the hospital steps, the hum of the city faint beyond the gates. Snow had started to fall, thin flakes melting as they touched the pavement. Lila leaned her head against his shoulder. "Every time I think I'm past the fear, something reminds me how easily everything can disappear," she said. He nodded, his breath clouding in the cold air. "That's the thing about fear," he murmured. "You don't outgrow it. You just learn who you want beside you when it shows up." She smiled faintly, tracing a gloved finger along the edge of her scarf. "You've gotten good at this," she teased. "At what?" "I knowing the right thing to say." He looked at her, his expression serious but soft. "I don't always know. I just mean it when I do." By spring, the hospital renovation was complete. The pediatric comfort room, the one that had once been a line of tape on the wall, was now open. A soft-lit space filled with art supplies, storybooks, and murals painted by volunteers. On the door hung a small silver plaque that read, "For those who hold on." And for those who help them do it. Lila found Adrian standing there one afternoon, hands in his pockets, just watching the light spill across the floor. "It turned out beautiful," she said. He turned slightly, smiling. You turned it beautiful. She shook her head.
No, you gave it a chance to exist. He was quiet for a moment.
You know, he said finally, when I left surgery, I thought I'd given up saving people. But I think I just needed to find a different way to do it. Lila's eyes softened. You did. He reached into his pocket then, pulling out something small. A folded photo strip from a year ago, the one from the booth at the festival. Her laughing, him looking startled, her tugging on his coat. The paper edges were worn, the colors faded. You kept that? She asked, surprised. Every day, he said simply. She laughed, quiet and warm. You really have no idea how much you've changed, do you? He met her eyes. Maybe I just found someone worth changing for. Summer arrived again, slower this time, more forgiving. The fair returned just as it always did, with lanterns and laughter and the scent of kettle corn drifting across the fields. And once again, beneath a sky painted gold and blue, a man and a woman stood at the base of the Ferris wheel. Same place, different story. Lila wore a pale scarf, the one he'd once carried home. Adrian still had the same quiet posture, but there was an ease to him now, a gentleness that hadn't been there before. They bought 2 tickets. The attendant, an older man with a crooked smile, recognized them. Back again? He asked. Lila smiled. Something like that. As they climbed into the cabin, the fair unfolded beneath them. Cotton candy stands, carousel music, a sea of moving lights. Do you ever think about that first night? She asked softly. Every day, he said. She tilted her head. And
I still can't believe 5 minutes almost cost me everything. Her laugh came easy now.
Guess I should be glad you're bad at keeping your own rules. He grinned. The best mistake I ever made. They sat in silence for a while, watching the horizon fade into lavender. Then Lila turned to him. You never asked, she said quietly, why I agreed to that blind date in the first place. He looked at her, curious. Why did you? She smiled, the memory flickering across her face. Your mother called the hospital. She said her son used to be a surgeon who forgot what joy looked like. She asked if I'd help remind him. Adrian blinked, stunned for a moment, then laughed, low and disbelieving. Of course she did. She said you'd only stay 5 minutes, Lila added, smiling wider now. So I made sure to make them count. He took her hand, eyes warm. You did? The Ferris wheel crested once more, pausing at the top. Below them the world glowed with 1,000 tiny lights. Lila leaned against him, whispering, You know, I think your mother was wrong about one thing. What's that? It didn't take 5 minutes for you to fall in love, she said softly.
It just took you that long to realize it. He laughed quietly, pressing his forehead to hers.
Then I guess I'm still realizing. Good, she murmured. Keep going. They stayed that way, suspended above the world, wrapped in light and wind and quiet certainty. And when the ride began to move again, neither of them looked down. Because sometimes love isn't about falling. It's about choosing, again and again, to stay. Epilogue. The scarf stayed on Lila's shoulders that night, but she left something else behind, a photo. The same Ferris wheel charm catching moonlight, 2 hands linked at the center. On the back, she had written just one line, for when 5 minutes becomes forever.